Greetings, dear viewer, and welcome to Purposes Crossed, where I hope that people who are called by Jesus for different purposes cross paths and exchange ideas. In this video, we will continue with our series of devotions on the Psalms, and today we are dealing with Psalm 23. We will devote two videos to this psalm, and this is the first video. Psalm 23 is easily the best known and best loved psalm from all of the Psalter. Many Christian traditions include it in their liturgies, in their responsive readings. Many musicians have set the words to music. Unfortunately, a superficial reading of the psalm has resulted in a failure to grasp its true and its unsettling message. The psalm begins with words of assurance. Yahweh is the psalmist's shepherd, and so the psalmist lacks nothing. Yahweh leads him to drink from fresh streams and to rest in green grasslands. With the refreshing water and the grazing in the fields, the sheep is restored to its full strength, and so is the psalmist. All of this sounds really pleasant and reassuring. Everything the psalmist needs, Yahweh provides, just as a shepherd provides the sheep with everything it needs. There is no lack experienced or danger felt in this idyllic world of provision and promise painted by the first verses of the psalm. And then the psalmist tells us, He leads me in right paths for His name's sake. All the preceding provision and promise are seen as expressions of Yahweh's providential hand over the psalmist. The lack of nothing, the green pastures and the fresh waters, are the right paths that Yahweh leads the psalmist on, and so the psalmist can rest in the security that Yahweh's providence provides. But immediately after declaring that all of his life is an expression of Yahweh's providence, the psalmist moves to a darker section of the psalm, which we often ignore to our detriment. The psalmist says, Even though I walk through the darkest valley, and the reader should be wondering where this thought came from. Wasn't it just in the previous verse that we read about Yahweh leading the psalmist along right paths? And then we realize that the dark valley, the darkest valley, is not an aberration in the life of the psalmist. Rather, it is precisely the right paths described in the previous verse. God does not spare the psalmist from these darkest valleys, and He will not spare us from them either. Rather, when we face darkness in our lives, we should view these as the darkness into which God has led us. And so we should not fear. Indeed, probably anticipating the thought that the darkest valleys would instill fear in the reader, the psalmist goes on to say, I fear no evil, for you are with me. We should look carefully at what David has done here. Till now, he has spoken about Yahweh and has referred to him with third person singular pronouns. But it is only when he thinks of walking in the darkest valleys that he moves from speaking about Yahweh to speaking to Yahweh. The pronouns switch from third person to second person. What David is telling us here is something that we have scarcely begun to grasp in our lives of faith. What he tells us is that, contrary to common belief, God is not truly experienced in the comfort of our lives. When we lack nothing and our bellies are full and we have a roof above our heads and clothes on our back, we have the ability to distance ourselves from God and speak about Him and refer to Him in the third person. But when we are in the darkest valleys, when life seems to be unraveling around us, that is precisely when we experience the nearness of God, who we must now speak to because He has drawn near to us in the darkness. The darkness, rather than being a sign of God's distance from us, is the valley in which we truly experience His embrace. The psalmist goes on to say, You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. While he experienced Yahweh's protection in the valley, the dangers are not all behind him, for there are still enemies. In the case of David, these were likely enemies who were literally out to kill him. One could think of Saul or Absalom, both of whom at different stages in David's life wanted him dead. Most of us likely do not have such enemies, but most of us probably know people who would cheer when we fall and be dejected when we are raised up. So David paints an interesting picture. His enemies have rallied together against him, probably in battle formation. But as if to mock them, Yahweh chooses this precise moment to declare His commitment to David, setting the table before him, and His commissioning of him, anointing his head with oil. The psalm ends with the words, Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. In the King James Version, it reads, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever," leading many Christians to think that this is referring to our eternal state. However, the NRSV rendition, "My whole life long," at the end, makes more sense of what David has written. David is not talking about spending eternity in heaven, but of having the privilege and ability, which he fully intends to use, of visiting the tabernacle through the rest of his life. Now, in this video, we have looked at an interpretation of Psalm 23. In the next video, we will see how the middle, dark section enables us to make sense of the life of faith so that we are not led to despair when facing difficult times.